The hill areas are a source of healthy calves and store cattle reared on the single-suckled system. This reclaimed land at 1,200 feet will provide hay or silage or summer grazing, but cattle must be kept off it in the winter. Poaching like this is why more herds are now being housed during the winter months. If labour and homegrown timber are available, the cheapest form of construction is the pole barn type of building, and if well designed, like this one, it won't look unsightly. The open ridge provides a good outlet ventilation. The purlins, the uprights, and the railings are larch poles, and the mangers made with sleepers. This demonstration building shows alternative materials for exterior walls: corrugated steel sheeting, 3/4 inch thick timber rough boarding, 1/2 inch thick resin bonded plywood, and vertical sleepers. But for many farmers, the choice is one of the prefabricated framed buildings in steel, concrete or timber. Where the climate is suitable, only the bedded area need be covered, allowing 40 to 50 square feet per cow. Although a total of twice this area is needed for each cow, the balance can be provided by open concrete exercise yard. In this case, silage is self-fed from a silo barn, but it could be manger fed in the open yard from a clamp, which would reduce the capital costs still further. Where the cows are entirely housed and fed under cover, care must be taken to provide adequate feeding arrangements. If silage is self-fed, 7 or 8 inches of feeding face is required per cow. Where silage or hay is manger-fed, not less than 2 feet of manger length per cow is needed. The concrete standing behind the feed barrier should be up to 18 inches above the yard floor and 5 foot 6 inches wide. Most of the dung falls at the heel stone. The back of the yard stays clean, and there is a considerable saving of straw. A sloping site can be an asset. Here the silo is filled by buckrake from a height 6 feet above the floor of the barn. Although built as strawed yards some years ago, all straw had to be bought, so now cubicles have been installed for 60 cows. The cubicle divisions are fixed to the flat concrete floor, with sleepers on edge as heel curbs, and the cubicle beds made up with 6 inches of dried soil, topped with a little straw. The saving in purchased straw very nearly paid for the cubicles in the first winter. The calves have a well-littered and sheltered part of one of the lean-tos. A tractor with a homemade scraper pushes the slurry into a cheaply constructed pit. Here again the sloping site is useful, as the pit can be emptied from one side by a conventional four-loader and dung spreader. Here is a similar building, but designed as a cubicle shed. Adequate ventilation is provided along the sides by a gap between the top of the wall and the eaves, and by space boarding at the gable ends. And a completely open ridge makes sure that the foul warm air can escape. The layout is simple: a central silo barn with a lean-to on each side containing the cubicles. A separate warm shed for the calves is still under construction. The 50-foot wide silo gives a feeding face for 80 cows, and the tombstone barrier cuts out all waste. During the winter on this one-man farm, only half an hour a day on average is needed to look after this herd, so a labour-saving idea like this cattle crush is a very necessary piece of equipment. The cubicle divisions are simply constructed in timber. The passage between the rows of cubicles is 10 feet wide and makes cleaning out by tractor an easy job. The slurry is pushed through a shuttered opening into a surface manure steading with sleeper walls. Here again, a sloping site is useful, as the manure can be taken out at ground level by normal farm machinery. In this cubicle setup, inlet ventilation is at eaves level and also through the open space above the gates at the sheltered end. These slotted sheets with vents along each side of the ridge provide outlet ventilation and help to prevent condensation and an unhealthy, humid atmosphere. This is a 50-foot clear-span general-purpose building. Hay is stored in the lofty central portion, except the end bay, which is the calf creep. The young calves must be kept warm, and the creep is kept well littered and protected against low-level drafts by sheeted gates 4 foot 6 inches high, with only one narrow opening for access. As the calves get bigger and the hay is used up, the creep is extended down the centre. 52 cows are housed here. Calving doesn't take place in this shed, but the cows and the calves quickly settle down when brought in 1 or 2 days later. The manure is pushed out onto a concrete dungstead and then handled like ordinary cowshed muck. The passageway gives access to the cubicles and to the simple manger and feed barrier. Feeding the hay into the manger takes only a few minutes. On a much larger scale is this triple-span building, 240 feet long, which houses over 200 cows in yards each side of a central feedway. Large buildings are particularly difficult to ventilate. Here, a special kind of flexible plastic mesh side cladding is used. It lets in fresh air, but breaks the force of the wind, and there's no draft. The layout allows 65 square feet of bedded area and 26 square feet of concrete exercise and feeding area per cow. Only 10 hundredweight of straw are needed per beast throughout the winter. Part of each yard is fenced off as a calf creep, which is kept well littered and dry. The concrete feeding area is 13 feet wide, and most of the dung falls here, thus keeping the bedded area clean. Scraping takes place daily into a mechanical muck removal system. The muck is then elevated to a spreader outside the building. Labour costs are important, and on this scale of farming, mechanization is justified. Silage is stored in open clamps and loaded into a side delivery trailer. This is then taken along the central feeding passage and the silage self-unloaded into the mangers. Feeding is done twice a day, and each feed takes 2 men only 20 minutes. Although these buildings are different, they all have certain basic principles in common. They're all designed to be labour-saving. Cattle are kept in well-ventilated conditions. Various methods cut the cost of litter. Finally, the buildings are simple and adaptable, so the initial capital cost can be spread over a longer period and the annual costs reduced.